watching Goodness Gracious, a brand new baking vlog. Thank you so much for joining me today for episode number 2. I love to bake and I love to share baking tips as well as the actual baked goodies with friends and family. I know that all of us are currently social distancing or we're in quarantine, so hopefully these videos will provide a little bit of connection for you and maybe a little bit of joy, as it always does for me whenever I'm baking on my own, because now is the time to do stuff in our own kitchens, as long as we have the ingredients, of course. And I am sorry if you are in an area right now where there is a shortage of something that I'm going to be baking with. Today, I'd like to bake some mini egg cookies because it is spring. There are flowers blooming outside. I live in British Columbia, so I am fortunate. We've actually had some lovely flowers for a little bit of time now. Since we're doing this lovely spring cookie, what I've actually done is I've put together some ingredients here for you based on my favorite classic chocolate chip cookie recipe. It's actually found on a fellow blogger's website, Sally's Baking Addiction. If you don't follow her, she's also on Instagram. She's fantastic. Don't know her personally, but I love her recipes. So this comes from that. There are so many different variations. So similar to what I was speaking to you about before about brownies and how there are so many different variations out there and it can be kind of overwhelming. You also want to make sure when you're making something like a chocolate chip cookie or a brownie that it's worthwhile, right? You want it to be better than a store-bought cookie. I clearly have all of my ingredients ready to go here. Again, organization is super important. Get this all ready to go before you start baking. We have some mini eggs here. This recipe does use a lot of butter and it has to be room temperature, so very important. You'll also see a lot of cookie recipes that call for melted butter. Those can be fantastic as well, especially if you don't want to necessarily have to cool the batter in the fridge. This one does require cooling time, so something to keep in mind just when you're scheduling your bake. So I've got the butter here already softened. I also have some sifted flour. I always like to sift my flour even if it is pre-sifted. It just adds a little bit of fluff and it just makes sure that you're not going to get any chunks of flour in your batter no matter what you're baking. So that's sifted. It's just a standard white flour that you'd find, all-purpose. And then in here, I've already combined the two measurements of both brown sugar. So this is my favorite, just standard brown sugar that I get. It's Rogers, as well as your granulated white. It's more brown versus white, which I think is a really nice combination. You can actually go, it's really fun to do a bit of an experiment when you're baking chocolate chip cookies if you have the time and of course the amount of ingredients and people that are willing to eat all of your cookies. But what I did in pastry school was a cool experiment and we tried different variations of sugars, so white versus brown. We took a look to see what would happen if you baked a cookie with no sugar at all. Clearly very unpleasant. The other thing that we tested out actually was instead of using butter, we used oil-based cookies as well. That's interesting. The flavor to me is just not the same. It goes without saying for me, but some people prefer an oil-based cookie because it reminds them of a store-bought cookie similar to what they would have had in their childhood. This is actually some baking soda, so that's our leavening agent, just a little bit. You don't want too much lift in a cookie because of course you don't really want a lot of aeration, right? You want the cookie to be pretty thick. It's a very rich treat. And then we have this is an interesting ad. So a lot of cookie recipes don't call for this, but this is cornstarch. It's only 2 teaspoons, so it's not very much. And it just holds the cookie together. If you think about what cornstarch does, if you've ever made a custard or curd, it's a similar concept. And it helps maintain the chewiness of a nice cookie too. So that's the cornstarch, and we have 1 large free-range organic egg and our vanilla extract as well. So, and salt of course over here too. So here we go, we're starting. And I'm going to throw in the baking soda. So all of our dry. It's just nice to get the dry and then kind of set it aside and do everything else, in my opinion. This is sticking in there. There we go. I'm gonna take my whisk. It's just a hand whisk for now. And I'm gonna mix that together. And I can't forget the salt either. I like to do this. Some people just throw everything all together, or they'll throw the dry after their wet has been combined, one at a time. The problem with that is there's the possibility that you're going to get chunks of salt or baking soda in places. It won't necessarily be evenly spread throughout the batter. So this prevents that from happening. Okay, so that has been whisked together. That's our dry. I'm gonna set it aside. And now we're gonna move on to our wet stuff. So I have my 2 sugars here, my egg, my butter that's been softened. This is all combining together. The first thing that I wanna do is I wanna cream the sugar and the butter together to get a little bit of air in there. So what you're gonna be looking for, you can either use a stand mixer, which is what I'm gonna do, or a hand mixer. It's fine either way. And this will probably take a couple of minutes because you want it to be nice and fluffy, and you'll notice that the color will likely change to be a little bit lighter as well. So I'm gonna do that over in my stand mixer. I always get so messy. I don't know if it's just me, this is always what happens, but I end up getting my hands on everything. So having just a cloth that is of course clean, that's sort of dedicated to your bake, and then just goes into the wash afterwards is extremely helpful. I go through so many of them, so I'm just gonna set that to the side. Okay, so the butter's in here with the sugar. You wanna make sure that all of it, of course, gets in. So the other thing, I mentioned that this is one of my favorite tools in the kitchen, of course, a spatula. This is my lovely heat-proof one that's very flexible too. That still allows me to actually grab thick batters. It's pretty useful. And you want to have your spatula handy anytime you're using the stand mixer. Okay, so now that I've creamed together my butter and sugar, I'm gonna grab my egg as well as my vanilla extract. It calls for a teaspoon of vanilla extract, so I'm just gonna get my measuring spoon ready. Okay, egg and vanilla are in here. I'm going to turn it back up to a medium-low speed, just to combine. This is where, because the egg is so wet, it'll often mix into the center of your creamed sugar mixture first. So don't be afraid of stopping a few times through this process to scrape down the sides. Okay, so my wet ingredients have now been combined. I can see that there is no apparent wet section where there's quite a bit of egg mixture left. This is when I know that it's ready to add the dry mixture. So this is what we pre-whisked and sifted earlier. Good. I like to, so whenever I'm adding a decent amount of dry to a wet mixture that isn't very liquid, I know right away that the flour is just going to explode as soon as I turn on the mixer. So the first thing that I like to do is I actually take this, so the paddle off, and I just leave it sitting upright like this while I scrape together. So just gently fold the flour into the wet mixture. Just a little bit to help it out a bit so that the flour doesn't actually explode everywhere, because that can become very, very messy very quickly. Okay, now I'm just taking the actual paddle, and of course we're going to be reattaching this. It just got this stuff everywhere. Okay, reattach the paddle. This is on low speed. As soon as this comes together, you're going to want to stop because you don't want to create a tough mixture at all. It's the same concept that goes with making a pastry dough. It's almost done now. Also, make sure that your mixing bowl is fully attached to the base, otherwise it's going to move around a lot. You probably noticed that that was what was happening to me. So I just readjusted that for myself. The other thing that we did in pastry school, so I mentioned the experiment and we tested variations of sugars, and we also tried different leavening agents. So baking soda versus baking powder versus a combination of the two. They have different reactions and very different purposes, which is something that I'll talk to you about when I get into baking any cakes, because that's where it's extremely applicable. And of course, in the brownie mix that I used previously, there was no chemical leavening agent. The only thing that we used to add air and actually structure as well into the mixture was whipped egg. So that's often used even in a classic sponge cake quite frequently. So that's my cookie batter, and you'll notice, I'll bring it up closer, it's very soft to the touch. I love a nice cookie batter, or cookie dough rather. So that's what your cookie dough should look like. It's nice and sturdy, but very soft to the touch and easy to roll around in your fingers. And now the fun part. So I've toyed with what I'm actually going to do, how I'm going to get the mini eggs through the mixture. And I think I want to do a combination of a few things. So whenever I'm cutting nuts or chocolate chips, or in this case mini eggs, which isn't very frequent, but I like to use a bread knife. So if you've got a nice serrated knife that's quite sharp, it's perfect for this kind of stuff, because instead of knocking everything around, because of course you're going to get a bunch of material on the floor if you use a different kind of knife, or often people will try to like pound something down to break it up. I want pieces of this, so I'm going to use a serrated bread knife. Perfect. I've got my nice sharp serrated bread knife here. I'm not going to do this to all of it. I just want a bit. Like I'm going to do maybe a handful, a bit more. Because the idea here, and you can do whatever you feel. I've definitely mixed this together where I've just thrown these in like I would with chocolate chips, and it's worked out just fine. Sometimes though it's difficult to get the right amount of mini eggs. You want that perfect ratio, right? So today what I want to do is I'm going to chop these up finely like this. So what you want to do is you take your hand here. I'm not a chef by any means, like a proper culinary chef, so I've never had knife training. I apologize if this is embarrassing to some of you. But you actually want to take the knife, and they are tough little things, so you've got to apply quite a bit of pressure. There. See, they are kind of flying around because they're so tough to cut through, but it's working. Slowly but surely. And this will be fun too, because it'll also add a bit of color throughout the batter. The idea is I'm going to actually mix this right into the batter. And then as we're rolling the balls for our actual cookies, before the cookies go into the oven, I want to add the rest on top of the cookies. Pretty happy with that. See, and it all just stayed on the cutting board magically. If you were to use any other knife, that would not happen. These serrated knives are fantastic for this. I use it for nuts all the time. Okay, so I'm bringing the batter back, and we'll pour this right in. All the little colorful flecks too, why not? I love mini eggs too because they just have such a nice spring pastel color combination to brighten everybody's day a little bit. This is where my spatula is becoming a little bit too soft for the job. I have another one that I'm going to use. It's a little bit tough. So it's nice to have a variety, right? For different jobs. So this one's pretty cute. My mom got it for me. It has Peter Rabbit on it. And it's way tougher, you'll notice. So it's good for this job. Yeah, it's much better. Just to make sure that all of these pieces are evenly spread out throughout the batter. And you could easily add nuts to this if you wanted. That would be really nice, actually. Some almond pieces or pecan pieces. Ideally, what I like to do is I like to roast the nuts first in the oven. But be careful, you never want to forget about roasting nuts because it generally takes about, say, 10 to 15 minutes at 350. Just spread out on a cookie sheet. It's very easy to roast nuts, and it just adds a little bit more of an intense flavor, like a nice roasty flavor to the nuts before you add them into a cookie. Okay, so that's nice and evenly combined. So I'm just gonna cover this, pop it into the fridge for at least an hour, if not 2 or 3, and up to a couple of days. So it can sit in the fridge overnight if you want to, if you want to make the batter ahead of time, or the dough. And that's it. They smell so good already. This does have raw egg and raw flour, so I would highly recommend not eating the cookie dough raw. Okay, great, yes, so I am going to cover this up. I'm also gonna cover these mini eggs. I'll clean up my station completely, and then I'll meet you back here once this is nice and cooled in the fridge. All right, welcome back. I know it's only been a few seconds for you, but it's actually been 24 hours for me as I chilled my lovely Easter egg cookie dough. So I'm really excited to get these into the oven now. Ideally at this point, so this is chilled, I just pulled this from the fridge and uncovered it. I've got some extra mini eggs off to the side here for decor. For additional decoration and maybe a little bit of an interesting flavor twist as well, I also found a bit of extra shredded coconut in my pantry today. And I thought we could maybe make a few cookies look like cute little Easter egg nests. So we'll give that a try to see if that tastes all right. I am just gonna be using a standard tablespoon today to sort of round the cookie dough. I'm sure that they're gonna come out a little bit uneven, but that's fine, they're home style cookies anyway. So the other thing that I have in terms of my station setup, I have a cloth down just because I'm going to be taking out my baking stone in a moment. I have a preheated oven. It's preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, so standard baking temperature. And then my baking stone has been in there for the preheat. That's really important if you're working with a baking stone. They are my absolute favorite thing to use whenever I'm baking any type of cookie. Sugar cookies come out amazing from working with a baking stone. Of course, a pizza also works really well. And this is also how I use or bake my sourdough breads as well. If you don't have a stone, that's perfectly fine. You can just use a standard baking sheet, preferably with parchment paper, or if you have those fantastic silicone liners, a lot of bakers love those things, and they work really well also, and they're fantastic to have in your kitchen for macaron making as well, if you're ever interested in those. So for me, I'm using my baking stone. I have my chilled dough here. Okay. So what I'm going to look for when I'm doing this, it's really tough because it's been in the fridge. I like my cookies, especially when they're this tight, to be fairly big. So you can use your hands, just make sure they're clean. Maybe a little bit bigger. There. So this I'm going to estimate is approximately 2 tablespoons worth of dough. You roll it into a ball. Try to get a nice variety of the colors of the eggshell and the full eggs if you've got them in your dough. Roll that into a ball. And then I'm going to take 1 full, just to add a little something on top. Press that down, but I'm not pressing the cookie down any further than that because I want them to actually expand in the oven, and they will do that. And I'm just going to continue to do this just one more time to show you what I'm going to do with the coconut. But you can experiment, and like I said before as well, you can use nuts in this. This is a classic chocolate chip cookie recipe. We're just using mini eggs today, so you can really throw whatever you have. Pretzels, if you like sweet and salty, that would be so good. Because these are very sweet, since mini eggs are also milk chocolate. They're not necessarily the highest quality treat ever. Some chocolate connoisseurs will probably be upset that I'm using them. But they're delicious and seasonal. So There we go. That's about the same size as my previous. I will speed up. It's nice when you get into a bit of a rhythm and the dough starts to soften ever so slightly from being out of the fridge, but you don't want it to soften completely because you don't want the butter to start to melt. Okay, so I'm going to see if this will stick. Yes, it does. So I just tossed this one right in my shredded coconut to cover it slightly, like that. And then the same thing in its nice little nest, I'm gonna place another mini egg on the top. All right, and I'm going to make quite a few of those, and then I'll show you how to place them properly on the stone. Okay, so I have rolled a sufficient number of cookies, so alternating coconut nests with just plain mini egg. And of course the batter, or dough rather, also has mini egg pieces in it, so there's going to be plenty of mini egg in here. Now I'm going to actually, since I do have my towel down, I'll bring over my warm stone. Be careful. There we go. And it's fine if you don't have all of the dough finished at this point, because it's ideal to keep these cookies approximately 1 to 2 inches apart, I'd say, preferably 2. On the sheet, because they are going to expand in the oven. They do have egg in there and they've got a leavening agent, and the butter as well is going to melt and spread. So that's important to keep in mind. So they are going into the oven for approximately 10 to 12 minutes based on your oven. You're going to want to keep an eye on them, and they're finished when they are risen and they're not liquid looking or shiny. Anyways, when you look at them in the oven, you can sneak a peek. These aren't like a cake, they're not going to collapse on you, but don't open the oven too many times through this bake, because it is quick. All right, so I'm going to bake these in here for approximately 10 minutes and I'll meet you back here. All right, so I just took all of my cookies out of the oven. I ended up doing 2 rounds or 2 batches of cookies on my stone, just based on how much space I had. So I took my spatula and I very carefully and quickly took each of the cookies off of the stone after they were out of the oven, and I placed them for a brief moment just on a standard cooking sheet, just so that they can maintain their shape for a few minutes. You don't want to have them sitting there the whole time they're cooling. That's why I've moved them to here to do the rest, just because they get super greasy on the bottom and you also don't want that. So it's a little bit of a timing game. So these are done. They're fully cooled. They're slightly warm and chewy. I'm really stoked. I'm not going to lie. I made these when I was hungry, and that's a really, really bad idea. I wouldn't recommend it unless you want to get a really bad stomach ache, especially while social distancing or while in quarantine. I'm very fortunate because I live in Vancouver, and as of right now, we can still go outside, especially in our neighborhood. It's pretty residential and there's lots of green space, not very many people around, so I can still social distance safely and run. And running, so distance running is a big part of my life. We were training for a marathon, and unfortunately big events like that are now canceled. But I am going to try my hardest to continue my training, which means that tomorrow is my long run. So I'm considering this to be part of my carb loading for that. Not really sure if that's a real thing, but I'm gonna just say it is. It also means I'm always extremely, extremely hungry right now. So I did eat 2 already when they were too hot. I should not have eaten them then. But anyway, that happened. Now I'm gonna enjoy one with you at the right time. So this is when they're still just ever so slightly warm and they should be nice and chewy. I'm gonna get a little bit closer just so that you can see how lovely these are. I'm really happy with the way that the shape turned out. You can tell that, I mean, they started as those little tiny balls, right? They spread nicely, evenly, not too flat. Sometimes you get a pancake cookie, you don't want that. So it's nice and round. It has some coconut and some egg. Chose a green one. Let's see how chewy you are. Yeah. Oh. Okay, yeah, I'm really, really happy. Really chewy on the inside. Taste test. They smell really vanilla-y, which is lovely. cookie texture, sorry, it's perfect in my mind. It's still nice and chewy. The chewiness should hold, which is nice, because I took them out of the oven before they got too golden and crisp. I like my cookies to be gooey. A lot of people like crispy cookies, so you can of course keep them in for longer if that's the way that you like them. Yeah, so I'm going to continue to enjoy this. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Goodness Gracious. I hope you liked it. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really excited to see you again soon, and I'll introduce some more recipes, tests, tricks, things that you guys want to see. So thanks again.